Look, you don't look like you live around here, pal.
Hey, I'm just riding my bike home. Back up.
Listen, that attitude is going to get you locked up.
I haven't done anything wrong, sir. Let me pass.
Step off the bike now or you're going in cuffs.
Don't touch my bike. Call your supervisor right now.
Thursday late afternoon, 1712, humid heat, still hanging over the concrete. A bicycle wheel stopped inches from the painted curb line at Freedom Square Community Pool, and Officer Nathan Thorne stepped sideways into the path like the public sidewalk belonged to him. Off the bike, right now. Kendrick Davis put one sneaker on the ground before the second command landed. A mesh backpack hung off one shoulder. 2 blue binders were strapped to the rear rack with a black bungee cord. Nothing about him looked dramatic. Dark work pants, faded gray polo, sweat dried in a salt line at the collar. The kind of face people forgot 2 minutes after passing it. Thorne's left hand stayed near the cuff case. His right thumb tapped the body cam twice before the activation light finally blinked on, delayed by a beat that mattered more later than it seemed in the moment. A city bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere beyond the chain-link fence, kids shouted near the shallow end, then went quiet when they saw the uniform. "This is a pedestrian corridor," Thorne said. "You don't ride through here. Hand over identification." Kendrick looked down once at the narrow strip of sidewalk, then at the sign bolted to a post 5 feet away. The sign covered pool hours helmet reminders and no glass containers. It said nothing about bicycles on the public walk. Is this a detention officer or a warning? That was not the question Thorne wanted in front of a crowd. He was already performing for 3 mothers under the shade canopy, a lifeguard dragging kickboards, and the teenage cashier at the front window who had stopped mid-sentence with a receipt in her hand. "Don't play word games," Thorne said. "Identification now, or the next step gets less pleasant." The body cam picked up the fluorescent buzz from the lobby behind the ticket window, the wet slap of someone running across tile in flip-flops, and the little static pop in Thorne's radio earpiece. The clip that later spread online was only 15 seconds long, shaky, and slightly overexposed, caught from an angle near the entrance fence. It showed the officer blocking the sidewalk, a bicycle half-turned toward the street, and a man holding still while pressure arrived in a uniform. Kendrick did not raise his voice. He did not touch the phone clipped inside his chest pocket. He did not look impressive. That was the first mistake Thorne made. The second mistake came when he said, "This ends in 30 seconds. ID or cuffs." Behind the glass, Tasha Green lowered the stack of day pass wristbands so slowly it looked like her hands had forgotten how to work. She had been at that counter 3 summers. She had seen arguments over fees, swimsuits closing time, and lost locker keys. This felt different. This felt like somebody had brought a furnace too close to dry grass. On the pool deck, one of the whistles chirped once uncertainly. Then the printer at the cashier window clicked and fed half a receipt before jamming. The paper stopped crooked with the word "member" sliced in 2. It should have been a small sound. It was not. It was the only sound for nearly 3 full seconds. And in that silence, Thorne reached for the cuffs. The metal moved before anyone else did. The bicycle pedal was still spinning when Kendrick said, "Then please say the reason clearly while your camera is on." And Thorne's jaw tightened at a detail he had not expected anyone to notice. Thursday late afternoon, 17:15, the air thick enough to taste chlorine at the gate. Thorne had the look of a man who believed the uniform could fill any gap in logic if he wore it hard enough. He was broad-shouldered, neatly pressed haircut. Precise nameplate bright enough to flash in the sun. The kind of officer who used calm words as a lid, right until the lid came off. "Reason is simple," he said. "Unsafe operation on a sidewalk in a family area. Refusal to identify, suspicious behavior." Kendrick's fingers stayed open at his sides. "Unsafe how? You came through here fast. Did anyone get hit?" That's not the threshold. One of the mothers near the fence shifted her child behind her leg. Tasha stepped out from the cashier window to the doorway, still holding the jammed receipt like she had forgotten it was there. "Officer," she said carefully, "he was on the outside sidewalk, not the deck." Thorne did not even turn toward her. "Back inside, ma'am." The way he said ma'am stripped the respect clean off it. Kendrick looked toward the doorway just long enough to register her expression, then back to Thorne. "There's a bike rack here for a reason." "That doesn't make you exempt." "I didn't say exempt. I asked the reason." Thorne took a step closer. "Here's the reason. People ride through here, kids get clipped, staff complains, then everybody asks why nobody acted. So now somebody acts. It sounded rational if a person ignored everything visible. The public sidewalk was 12 feet wide. The bike had already stopped. No child had come near him. No one had complained until Thorne decided the complaint would exist. A facilities worker pushing a yellow mop bucket came out of the side gate, saw Kendrick and said, "Mr. Da," then he caught himself and stared at the concrete. "Sir, you left those binders last week in the office, right?" Kendrick answered without looking away from Thorne. Different set. The worker nodded too fast and backed away. That was clue number 1 for anyone watching closely, though. Almost nobody caught it then. Thorne heard it. So did Tasha. Both filed it somewhere without understanding it. What's in the binders? Thorne asked. Safety material. For who? For the building. Thorne let out a short breath through his nose. That answer alone makes this detention stay right here. He wanted deference. He wanted the little flinch that let him widen the stop. He wanted a voice to rise so he could call it agitation. Instead, Kendrick only shifted the bicycle fully onto the curb and set the kickstand. That tiny act changed the visual of the scene. No longer rider versus officer. Now it was stationary man, secured bike, public walkway, uniform blocking exit. Please point to the boundary you believe was restricted, Kendrick said. What? The line, the sign, the barrier. Point to it on camera. That was the educational move, clean and short. Not a lecture, not a speech, just a request for the claimed rule to be tied to a visible object. Thorne glanced, despite himself, at the signs by the gate. Pool hours, no pets, no glass. Children under 12 require adult supervision. Nothing about bicycles on the city sidewalk. His radio cracked with half a dispatch call from somewhere else clipped by interference. For a second, the audio warbled and swallowed the last words. The bystander clip later made it sound like someone on the radio had warned him off immediately. That was wrong. The first imperfection created the first false rumor. It bought Kendrick no miracle, only confusion. Don't instruct this stop, Thorne snapped. Hand over ID. Am I free to leave if I walk the bike away from the entrance? Number. Then this is a detention. Thorne's nostrils flared. You are being detained for investigation. Investigation of what specific suspicion? Don't get slick. That's not an answer. 2 teenage boys near the fence lifted their phones without fully understanding why. One filmed through the chain links. The pattern cut shadows across Kendrick's shirt and made the scene look harsher than it was, like a cage had appeared where none existed. Tasha came one step farther out of the doorway. Officer, the kids are staring. Then tell them to mind their business. She stopped because fear and employment often shared the same body, but she did not go back inside. She slid her own phone into the pocket of her shorts and hit record by touch. Thorne took Kendrick's silence for resistance. Hands behind your back. Kendrick's voice stayed level. No sudden movement, no resistance. I'm asking again what crime is being investigated. You don't get to control this scene. No, but the camera helps. That line cut more cleanly than if he had shouted. Even the lifeguard on the stand turned his head. Thorne grabbed Kendrick's wrist. The first cuff closed with that hard, thin click that always sounded smaller than the consequence attached to it. Kendrick inhaled once steady and controlled. His other hand remained visible. No pulling, no twisting, no performance. Stop tightening it, Kendrick said quietly. It's already seated. You can complain later. Tasha said he's not even fighting you. Now Thorne turned. Inside. Now. She did not move. A child somewhere near the shallow end asked too loudly, Mom, what did he do? Nobody answered, and that was worse than if they had. Thorne reached for the second wrist, but the Bodycam gave a sharp, low-battery chirp. He froze, annoyed, and slapped the side of the unit like impatience could charge it. The chirp stopped. The recording did not fail, but the warning pushed his attention off the hand he was cuffing and onto the equipment on his chest for half a second too long. Kendrick used that second the way some people used a door left cracked open. Please state your badge number and request a supervisor. You'll get what you get. State the badge number. Turn around. State the badge number for your own report. It sounded almost courteous. That made it land harder. The second cuff never closed because another voice entered from the walkway behind them. Nathan said, a female officer approaching fast from the lot, "What do you have?" Thorne did not answer immediately, and that hesitation was the first ugly gap in his version of events. Because there still wasn't a sign on camera that matched the stop. Thursday early evening, 1723 Thunderheads building far west, but sunlight still hard across the pool fence. The arriving officer was younger, slimmer, less sure of the ground under her boots. Her nameplate read, C. Morrow. She took in the half-cuffed man, the stationary bicycle, the phones, the staff at the doorway, and the fact that Thorne was already annoyed before she heard one sentence of justification. Unsafe riding refusal to identify possible obstruction, Thorne said at last. Obstruction of what Kendrick asked immediately. Morrow looked at him then at the empty sidewalk behind him. Did anybody call this in? I observed it. Any injury? Number? Any collision? Not needed. That exchange took 5 seconds and did more damage to Thorne than a longer argument would have. He heard it too, so he stepped harder onto his authority. He's prolonging a lawful stop. That's enough. Kendrick turned his head just enough to keep his voice aimed toward both cameras. To be accurate, there was no warning before detention language, no visible restricted line explanation, and no stated offense beyond a general description. Morrow's eyes flicked to the sign. She did not like what she saw there, which was nothing. Thorne tried to reclaim the scene with speed. ID final chance. Kendrick nodded once toward the mesh backpack on the bike rack. Wallet is in the front zipper, left side. Please don't dump the contents. Now you want to cooperate. I've been asking for clarity. That's not the same thing. Thorne yanked the zipper too far and spilled a folded notepad, a granola bar, a cable bundle, and a laminated city access card onto the sidewalk. The card landed face down in a shallow, chalky patch near the curb. He ignored it and pulled the wallet. Tasha flinched at the sound more than the movement. Small humiliations always hit harder when they were unnecessary. Thorne opened the license and read aloud only the name. Kendrick Davis. The rest of the card was visible for a blink before his hand covered it again. Later, the freeze frame would show the gold state seal, a professional-grade city access badge under the license flap, and 3 dates no one was supposed to tie to the incident: DOB, September 14th, 1991, issue June 18th, 2024, expiry September 14th, 2032. Address checks out, local Morrow said. Run him, Thorne said. For sidewalk biking. For detention. Kendrick spoke before Morrow could key the radio. Please request the supervisor first, then preserve the camera footage from the pool entry and lot angle. Thorne let out a dry laugh. Preserve. The retention is short here, Kendrick said. You don't want that missed. That was clue number 2. A random man did not usually know the retention window of a community pool camera system. Morrow noticed. Tasha noticed. Thorne heard only tone. You worried about building a lawsuit already, he said. Kendrick's expression barely changed. Worried about accuracy. Morrow keyed her shoulder mic anyway. The first transmission came back, broken, chopped by static from the storm front and the concrete walls around the pump room. She had to repeat herself. That was the second imperfection. It delayed the supervisor request by 40 seconds and let Thorne keep control of the stop longer than he should have. Unit 12 requesting field supervisor at Freedom Square pool entrance, she said again. 1 detained, 1 cuff, applied public visibility dispute over lawful basis. Dispatch came back with a hiss, then words. Copy Unit 12. Supervisor en route. ETA 9. Thorne hated that phrasing. Dispute over lawful basis, not resisting subject, not aggressive male, not disorder. The radio had made the stop sound exactly like what it was. Tasha finally spoke up again. Can somebody loosen that cuff? Thorne looked at her like she had crossed a line he had only imagined until she stepped over it. Inside. Last warning. She swallowed. Then she did the brave thing small enough to matter and big enough to cost her if the wrong person noticed. She bent, picked up the laminated access card he had spilled, and held it out. Your card fell. He reached for it, but she turned it toward Kendrick instead. Her eyes dropped to the printed line under his name. She blinked once hard. She did not say what she read. She only understood that the scene had become more dangerous for a different reason. Thank you, Kendrick said. Thorne snatched the card from the air before either of them could pocket it. What is this? A badge for city facilities access. Doing what? Dropping off compliance binders. What compliance? Kendrick looked directly at Morrow, the kind that gets ugly when people improvise. That line traveled through the scene and changed the temperature. Thorne heard challenge. Morrow heard warning. Tasha heard the first edge of something larger than a bad stop. The silence that followed was not empty. The vending machine in the lobby hummed so loudly it seemed to push against the glass. A loose gate latch knocked once in the wind. The printer inside tried to clear the same jammed receipt, its rollers whining without progress. Every cheap machine in the building sounded suddenly expensive. Dispatch came back again. Field Supervisor Sergeant Elena Ruiz, ETA 6. Not one person there knew that Ruiz had already heard enough in the radio exchange to start recording notes before she arrived. Thorne recuffed his grip, squared his shoulders, and tried to get the scene back with force of posture alone. Sit on the curb, he ordered. Kendrick did not refuse. He did not comply either. Before doing that, please confirm whether you intend arrest, citation, or release after identification. You don't ask the questions. The timeline will. Morrow glanced at him sharply at that word. Timeline. Another odd piece in the pile. And the Bodycam battery chirped again, lower this time, as if the equipment itself was starting to doubt the stop. Thursday early evening, 1731. The first gust of pre-storm wind skimming wrappers along the fence line. Sergeant Elena Ruiz arrived without lights, without hurry, and without any interest in theatrics. That alone separated her from Thorne. She parked at the curb, stepped out and took in the picture before saying a word. 1 cuff on 1 cuff off. No obvious injured party, multiple witnesses, public facility signage, visible subject calm. Talk, she said to Thorne. Sidewalk. Riding through a family zone, refusal to identify evasive answers, possible obstruction. Ruiz held up a hand. Possible means what happened, not what felt likely. Thorne's mouth closed. Ruiz turned to Kendrick. Any weapons? None. Any sudden movements coming? Number. Any complaint of force? Cuff is tight, the basis is worse. A couple of the bystanders almost laughed from nerves, then didn't. Ruiz stepped closer, checked the cuff spacing with 2 fingers, and looked at Thorne. Why one cuff? He kept questioning the stop. Ruiz stared at him for a beat too long. That didn't answer the question. He had nothing better, so he said control. Ruiz turned to Morrow. What independent basis? Morrow took a breath. Observed riding on the sidewalk. No collision seen. No complainant. No signage pointed out. Subject asked whether detained. Asked for supervisor. Asked what suspicion was claimed. Ruiz nodded once. Then she did what good supervisors did when they saw a scene sliding toward a cliff. She widened the record before deciding anything. Witnesses, she said. Tasha stepped forward before anyone else could. He rode up outside the gate, not through the pool deck. He stopped when told. Officer demanded ID almost immediately. Name, Tasha Green. Role, front desk. How long employed here? 3rd summer. Ruiz wrote that down. The pen scratched audibly in the brief quiet. One of the mothers added, he never came near the kids. A teenager by the fence said the bike barely moved after the officer got there. Thorne lifted his chin, trying one last public authority move. Crowd testimony doesn't overrule an officer's observation. Kendrick answered before Ruiz could. No, but it does narrow it. Ruiz looked from one face to the next, then at the access card still in Thorne's vest pocket. What's the city credential? Thorne handed it over reluctantly. Ruiz read the line beneath Kendrick's name and her eyes changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Why are you here today, Mr. Davis? That was the opening of the lock. Routine site review, Kendrick said. Dropped revised incident forms, checked the camera placement issue near the west gate, and came back with corrected binder tabs because someone used the old version. Ruiz asked the next question differently from everyone else. Which office issued the correction? The Department of Public Risk and Access Compliance. Tasha's hand went to her mouth. Morrow looked at Thorne. Thorne's face stayed still the way walls stayed still when cracks had already started inside them. Ruiz spoke very carefully. Position. Kendrick held her gaze. Outside counsel. Lead Civil Rights Compliance Advisor on City Facilities and Police Interface Retention Policy. There it was. No narration needed it. No dramatic music could have hit harder. The ordinary man on the bike had just become the person who wrote the retention workflow that governed this very scene. Nobody moved for a second. Then Thorne said the dumbest possible thing. That doesn't make him exempt. Kendrick answered correct. It makes accuracy expensive. The line landed like a dropped weight. Ruiz's radio mic was already in her hand. Dispatch, this is Sergeant Ruiz. Mark the detention scene frozen pending supervisory review. No arrest action. Repeat no arrest action. Advise all units, this is a stand-down pending legal basis assessment. Dispatch returned almost immediately. Copy stand-down recorded. Morrow exhaled through her nose, the sound half relief, half dread. Ruiz looked directly at Thorne. Remove the cuff. He hesitated one fraction too long. Now she said, the metal opened. Kendrick rolled his wrist once and lowered his arm. The indent on the skin was pale at first, then redder around the edge. Ruiz continued without changing volume. All body cam preserved. Pool C CTV preserved. Lot angle preserved. No one touches report language until I review, and somebody gets me the facility manager. Tasha whispered almost to herself. Oh my God. Kendrick flexed his hand, then looked at Ruiz. Preservation notice also needs to go out before close of business. Ruiz gave one short nod, already thinking that. Thorne's face did not fall apart yet, but his certainty did. That was the midpoint twist doing what it was supposed to do, not just revealing status, but reclassifying every move made before it. The teenage boy filming lowered his phone and looked at the screen like the video had changed genre in his hand. Because it had stopped being a random public stop and turned into a record of somebody stepping on the wrong wire. Thursday, early evening, 1746. First distant thunder, the smell of rain mixing with hot pavement. A midpoint reveal did not end anything. It only changed the kind of fight underway. Once the stand-down hit dispatch, the scramble began somewhere higher up the chain. The facility manager arrived, sweating through a pale blue dress shirt, carrying keys he kept dropping against his thigh. He recognized Kendrick instantly and went paler than the weather. Mr. Davis. Sorry, Counselor Davis? Kendrick cut him off with a look sharp enough to be polite. Save titles. Preserve footage. Already trying, the manager said. The West Angle export is hanging. There was the failure tax. They moved into the cramped office off the lobby, where the camera monitor wall showed 4 grainy views, ticket window pool, gate, west sidewalk, parking lot entrance. The West Angle clip, the one that actually showed the bicycle path and Thorne's body position, was stuck at 19% export on the NVR. The manager jabbed at the keys. Nothing. Don't, Kendrick said. If it crashes, the clip index can corrupt. Ruiz stepped in behind him. Any cloud backup? Partial, the manager said. Not full res on all angles. West camera rolls to cloud every 10 minutes. Local system has the clean file. That overwrite window you mentioned, Ruiz asked. 72 hours on local at current load, Kendrick said. But if the index breaks, the useful piece can disappear before the retention clock technically ends. Tasha stood in the doorway, clutching a notepad she had not realized she was holding. This was her second appearance in the Ark, and this time she did more than witness. I printed the front desk log, she said. Sign-in time complaint line, no incident entries before the stop. Everybody turned toward her. Ruiz held out a hand. Bring it here. The paper was still warm from the machine and smelled faintly metallic toner and heat. Physical reality. Not rumor. Not memory. The timestamp line showed no facility complaint before December 17th. If someone had called staff concern into existence, it had happened after Thorne began the detention. Ruiz took the sheet eyes, scanning fast. Good. Thorne tried to make room for himself in the room again. A policy contact being on site doesn't erase officer discretion, Kendrick answered without even turning. No, but it does make fabricated urgency easier to test. I never fabricated anything. Then the radio and the signs will help you. He finally lost the smooth edge. This is exactly the attitude that makes routine contact impossible. Ruiz spun on him. Routine contact doesn't begin with one cuff on a calm man and no articulated basis. That was the first real crack in the public version. The second came when dispatch sent over the CAD event summary to Ruiz's tablet. The initial stop category had been entered as suspicious person before any identity check, then modified 2 minutes later to bike hazard after Morrow arrived. The shift in wording sat there in cold system text. Not proof by itself, but proof had friends now. Why was the category changed? Ruiz asked. Thorne said nothing. Morrow did, and that mattered, because there wasn't an obvious pedestrian contact issue when I arrived. That admission cost her something. It also saved her. The NVR progress bar jumped from 19 to 41, then froze again. The office went quiet except for the fan rattle from the old desktop tower under the desk. The machine sounded like it was chewing on gravel. Please tell me nobody updated firmware this week, Kendrick said. The manager looked sick. Tuesday night. Nobody swore. They all wanted to. Cloud backup became the second path. But the cloud portal wanted 2-factor authentication tied to the assistant manager's phone, and the assistant manager had already left for a dentist appointment across town. Human gatekeeper refusal would have been one kind of friction. This was tech delay, pure and ugly. It did not change reality. It only threatened timing. Ruiz put in the preservation request over department email from her phone while standing in a doorway that smelled like damp cardboard and chlorine. Send acknowledgement, she said aloud as she typed, making the room hear every word. Bodycam. CAD. Pool. CCTV. All witness media voluntarily offered. Kendrick nodded once. Good. Thorne stood near the sink, saying less now because each sentence had started turning solid on contact. When the email acknowledgement hit Ruiz's inbox, the subject line was plain and devastating. Hold request received. No courtroom drama, no music swell, just text on a cracked screen with a thumbprint smudge near the edge. Read that back, Kendrick said softly. Ruiz did. That was clue number 3 completed. He knew not just what to ask for, but the exact sequence that prevented institutional amnesia. Outside the office, rain began in sparse taps against the lobby glass. Tasha looked from Kendrick's cuff mark to the screen to Thorne's face and understood something simple and powerful. The danger had changed sides. Thorne still had one move left. People like him always did. He straightened, reached for official tone, and said, "Given the totality, a citation remains available." Ruiz stared at him so flatly that even the rain seemed to hold. For what line, she asked. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His hand trembled once on the radio cord, barely visible. But the body cam later caught the tiny plastic click. That was the villain crack moment arriving early, not as remorse, but as the first involuntary signal that the mistake had finally become real. Then the West Angle export unstuck, and climbed to 62%. And every person in that office suddenly understood the last useful lie was about to run out of oxygen. Thursday evening, 1811, rain steady now, lobby lights making gold squares on the wet concrete outside. The climax did not happen in a courtroom. It happened in a municipal office with bad ventilation, a monitor with dead pixels in one corner, and too many people pretending not to hold their breath. The West Angle clip finished exporting at 1809. The file name populated with camera number time slice and a redacted /sample export stamp November 8, 2025, in the corner of the receipt template because the vendor software pulled a sample header format during manual export. Nobody mistook it for the incident date because Kendrick made sure no one would. Read only the time slice, he said, not the template header. The manager nodded quickly. Ruiz had the Bodycam on one screen West Angle, CCTV on another, and the CAD activity log open on the tablet beside them. That was the ladder-shaped log plus supervisor stand-down plus video verification. Not the default pattern, not something easy to wave away. Play both from 1712-20, Ruiz said. The screens rolled. On the West Angle camera, Kendrick appeared riding at an easy pace along the public sidewalk outside the pool gate, one hand briefly off the bar to adjust the binders on the rear rack. No child near him, no sudden swerve, no hazard, no entry through the gate. Then Thorne came in from frame left and stepped directly across the path before Kendrick reached the bike rack. On Bodycam, Thorne's voice said, "Off the bike, right now." On CAD, the original stop category had already been typed as suspicious person before any talk of bike safety appeared in the record. Ruiz let it run 5 more seconds. On the split screens, the sign was visible at the gate. No bicycle restriction. No restricted boundary. Just hours and pool rules. Then came the line. On Bodycam, Kendrick asked, "Is this a detention officer or a warning?" On Bodycam, Thorne answered with pressure, not basis. On West Angle, there was no visual behavior that matched immediate restraint. Ruiz paused the footage. The monitor refresh lagged for half a beat, leaving a smear across Thorne's shoulder before the image settled. Even the machine seemed offended. "No collision," Morrow said quietly. "No complainant before contact," said Tasha from the doorway voice, barely above the rain. "No sign," said Ruiz. Kendrick said nothing. That was the evidence slam. Not because anyone shouted, because nobody needed to. Thorne tried once more. Camera angle doesn't capture speed correctly. Kendrick finally turned toward him. Then the body position does. You moved into the path. Ruiz resumed the clip for another 12 seconds. The bystander phones rose after the stop, not before. The public attention was a reaction, not the cause. The suspicious person category predated the claimed bike hazard. The cuff came out before any specific violation was explained. Every piece stood on its own. Together they formed a wall. Ruiz looked at Morrow. Anything to add before formal review? Morrow swallowed. Yes. He asked for the exact suspicion. It wasn't provided. Anything else? He asked for supervisor and preservation, calmly. Ruiz nodded. Then she did the thing that changed consequences from private discomfort to institutional action. She started drawing a timeline board on the whiteboard hung beside the monitor. 1712, officer blocks sidewalk. 1712, CAD category, entered suspicious person. 1713, detention language. 1714, cuff applied. No collision alleged. 1715, witness contradicts hazard. 1716 category shift toward bike issue. 1723, partner arrives. No independent basis observed. 1731, supervisor requested 1733. Stand down after identity and role revealed 1746 preservation request sent 1809 West Angle export confirms path block. Marker squeaked across the board. Wet uniforms smelled like rain and fabric starch. The manager kept rubbing at an oily fingerprint on the export receipt and only succeeded in spreading it wider across the margin. That board became the image the local reporter later described on air. Not loud, not cinematic, devastating anyway. By 1824, Internal Affairs investigator Dana Mercer was on speaker. By 1839, she was in the building. She asked no grand questions. She asked the right ones. Why suspicious person first? Why one cuff before articulated basis? Why category, revision after partner arrival? Why no Bodycam acknowledgement of the sign? Why no citation line identified when offered? Thorne's answers got shorter as the night deepened. When Mercer asked, "Did you believe city policy exempted him?" he said no. That helped no one, least of all him. When she asked, "Then what changed at stand down?" he said nothing for so long that even the fan under the desk sounded embarrassed. Tasha in the doorway again began to cry very quietly and looked angry at herself for it. Ruiz noticed and handed her a tissue without breaking the flow of questions. That was the heart of the story landing where it belonged, not with power, but with a worker who had seen something wrong and chosen not to look away. By the time the rain slowed, the story had shifted from whether the stop was lawful to how many records would now have to answer for it. And the answer turned out to be more than one man in one uniform. Thursday night, 1922, storm passing east, the wet parking lot reflecting the lobby lights like broken yellow tiles. Fallout in real life came with emails, interviews, and careful language that still cut like wire. Within 48 hours, the department placed Nathan Thorne on administrative leave pending formal review. That part was predictable. The less comfortable part came from the record sweep. The CAD audit showed a pattern of vague verification. Stops entered before clear offense categories in several unrelated contacts over the prior months. Not enough by themselves to prove every stop improper. Enough to justify broader review. That was how systems cracked not from one spectacular lie, but from repeated shortcuts that finally met a scene with witnesses, preserved video, and the wrong target. Kendrick did not hold a press conference. He did not posture on the evening news. He signed the complaint with a hand that trembled only once when the pen crossed the first line. Tasha saw that and understood another truth the internet often missed. Staying calm was not the same as feeling safe. A week later, Dana Mercer held the first review interview with Thorne under Garrity protection procedures. The recording later summarized it in dry, careful prose. But one detail survived in every account when asked why he had not simply warned the writer and documented community education. He stared at the table long enough for the room tone to become a presence. Someone's HVAC clicked on. A chair creaked. Finally, he said almost too low for the microphone. It looked like one of those contacts that either gets handled or gets mocked online later. That sentence exposed everything. Not policy, not safety, performance, ego under uniform cloth. It was not redemption, it was collapse. The city attorney's office sent a settlement inquiry before litigation matured into a public fight, not because the case needed noise, but because the records were too clean to ignore. The preservation notices had worked, the files held, the witness statements aligned. The department's own supervisor stand-down audio turned into a procedural knife nobody could grab by the blade. Month by month, the consequences stacked. Month 2 proposed disciplinary findings, sustained for improper detention, poor report integrity, and failure to articulate lawful basis. Month 3, final separation recommendation. Month 4, City Council Public Safety Committee requested a camera retention compliance briefing after a reporter obtained the whiteboard timeline photo and the redacted review memo through records requests. Month 5, settlement finalized with monitoring terms, supervisor refresher training, and a revised stop documentation protocol for public facility contacts. No miracle money, no fantasy jackpot, just the kind of resolution institutions hated because it cost more than cash. It cost process. The reporter Lila Bennett from Channel 6 only ran the story after she had documents in hand. Split-screen stills. CA dice sequence. Redacted hold acknowledgement. No rumor language. No outrage bait. Her package led with the public sidewalk frame and ended with the timeline board. This was not a dramatic chase, she said in voiceover. It was a quiet detention attempt that failed under documentation. That line spread because it was true. The pool reopened the next week under normal schedule. Kids came back, parents brought folding chairs, lifeguards yelled about no running like always. The world did not pause to honor paperwork. It never did. But something had changed. At the front desk, a new sign sat below the window. Public walkway access facility rules. Apply inside gates only. Another notice beside it listed how to request incident numbers, supervisor names, and records preservation contacts after police interactions at city recreation sites. Tasha taped both signs up herself. When Kendrick returned for the first follow-up site visit, he carried no binders on the bike rack this time. They were digitized, now secured through the city portal. He parked, walked the path, and stopped at the window. Tasha smiled in that tentative way people smiled after living through something ugly together. Printer works now, she said. Kendrick glanced at it. That's good. It had a rough day. She laughed once a little watery, then got serious. That day could have gone another way. It often does, he said. She nodded toward the sign. Not here as easily. That was the quiet victory. No speech, no revenge fantasy, just design changed by evidence. And Thorne. His name disappeared from the active roster before the year turned. The final discipline letter did not thunder. It described improper escalation, insufficient legal basis, report inconsistency, failure to align action with observed facts. The words were bureaucratic. The impact was not. Morrow stayed. Her supplemental interview, because it was truthful, protected her. Ruiz was commended privately, not publicly, for freezing the scene and preserving the record before anyone could polish language over the damage. The facilities manager got written corrective counseling for the firmware issue that nearly cost the export. Even that became part of reform: no unscheduled video system updates during active recreation weeks. The real ending arrived on a dry Thursday, almost half a year later, when the Public Safety Committee held up the revised protocol packet. Kendrick stood in back, anonymous again by choice. Tasha watched the live stream from the front desk during her break. Ruiz testified for 11 minutes about scene-freezing articulation and why supervisor arrival had to mean more than simply adding another body to the pressure line. At the end of the meeting, the committee chair said, "This city learned from a small stop that wasn't small at all." That line would have sounded corny anywhere else. There it fit, because the stop had never really been about a bicycle. It had been about whether a man in public could be turned into a convenient threat, because the uniform standing in front of him wanted the feeling of control more than the work of justification. The answer came back in bodycam chirps, wet paper, witness voices, a jammed printer, a supervisor radioing stand down, and a worker brave enough to step out from behind a counter 3 separate times when silence would have been safer. At 20:04, after the hearing ended, Tasha texted a photo of the updated front desk signs to Kendrick. No caption. She did not need one. He looked at the image for a long time before slipping the phone back into his pocket. No celebration, no grin, just shoulders dropping 1 inch lower than before. Then he unlocked his bike, checked the path out of habit, and rode home along a sidewalk that had always been public, always been ordinary, and would never look quite ordinary again. The end. Afterward, mandatory value, a D. Closing thoughts. Moments like this matter because misconduct often depends on speed confusion and the hope that nobody will slow the scene down enough to test the reason being claimed. The safest response is not loudness. It is control. Stay calm. Ask the reason in one short sentence. Ask whether you are being detained or free to leave. Request a supervisor if the explanation keeps shifting. If cameras are nearby, ask that footage be preserved early before memory and systems begin to drift apart. The most effective protection is usually not a perfect speech. It is a clean record, a clear question, a repeated incident number, a witness who says exactly what they saw. Real accountability rarely arrives with fireworks. It arrives with documentation that can survive denial. Justice does not need to shout when the record is solid. Some elements are selectively fictionalized for education.